Hello, I'm Dave Ferraro from Comics and More.
And I'm Patrick Markfort from the Articulate Nerd weblog. This is the third episode of the Comics and More podcast. Today we are going to be reviewing two new #1 issues. Mystic, that Marvel Comics published under the CrossGen banner, and Racial Rising #1 by Terry Moore. So I think we'll kick off this third episode with our introduction, our review of Mystic.
All right.
#1.
Yeah, Mystic #1. And this is coming to us from G. Willow Wilson and David Lopez. And G. Willow Wilson is recently hot off of Air for Vertigo, which a lot of people have been really enjoying. And she started out with a graphic novel, Cairo. So this is her third major work that she's done. And I'm a huge CrossGen fan, so of course I was very excited when Marvel announced that they would start to publish these CrossGen comics again. And they kind of relaunching them with a Marvel spin to them. But this is the third series that they're doing that with, the third mini-series. It started out with Ruse and Sigil. And Mystic was actually one of my favorite CrossGen titles, so I was really excited that they did this one.
You were a big CrossGen fan.
I was a big CrossGen fan, yep. I remember walking into my first Wizard World Chicago. The CrossGen had big like banners and pillars like all over the place at the very front of the convention, and it just really sucked me in from there. And I remember that was my only year I really went around like getting autographs from other creators and getting really excited to be at a convention. And it made me very sad when CrossGen went away. I followed all their stuff, but now they're publishing it again through Marvel, so that's exciting. And Mystic is pretty true to the original book, I feel like, too, compared to how some of the other ones were. Like, Sigil was a drastic reinvention of this series. They threw in elements from El Cazador. It was pretty much like it was a completely different comic. Ruse was, Mark Waid did that one, and he was one of the original CrossGen guys, so that was more true to that book as well. Mystic, however, is also true to it, but they did change some things up, I think a lot for the better. It makes it a little more streamlined for a mainstream audience, I feel like. The original Mystic actually had the main character as a kind of socialite who... She's just kind of like felt like she was like kind of above people. She was just kind of like flirtatious, like, whatever.
So she was part of the social elite that these two girls both are not a part of in this book.
Yep, exactly. There wasn't so much of a class differentiation, I recall, from the first one as there is in this one. Like, they make a point of saying that the noble arts is what they practice in this, so it's only the noble that really get into the get to be like apprentices for the magic. But I don't remember that being a huge part of the original series as much. But she was definitely a socialite in the first one, and she was kind of a bitchy character, I would say. This one, when they relaunched it this time around, G. Willow Wilson made her a very more identifiable character to the audience, I feel like.
Which one? The dark-haired girl?
The dark-haired girl, yep.
Oh, okay.
The main girl, yep. I don't remember her name, actually. I know Giselle's one of them. I don't remember the name of the other one. But obviously in this one they're actually orphans, so, kind of like going back to like Harry Potter and, those kind of characters like that people identify with, the underdog kind of, coming to rise.
They weren't orphans.
They weren't orphans in the original one. Nope. And they actually changed the hair color of the sister too. They both had dark hair in the first one. I don't know if they're actually sisters in this one. I think they're just at the orphanage together. So they changed that too. And that's kind of a smart decision, just a visual, be able to identify between the two. Because in the first series, it was pretty much like one had short dark hair, one had long dark hair. Right, yeah. So it was a little harder, but this one, they made some very basic, changes to make it a little more accessible to readers. And I personally really enjoyed it. I didn't think they really brought anything new to the table as far as a story like this goes. It was pretty close to the original issue, which I actually skimmed over before we did this. I know one major change was that, first of all, they didn't talk about the different kind of guilds they had. They have different guilds for different magics in the original Mystic, and this time they only kind of center on the one kind of magic group in this city. I don't know if there's other guilds. Maybe later issues will touch on that. right now there's just one guild it looks like that they're talking about. And then that original Mystic comic too was when the sigil appeared, and it attached itself to the main girl. So this one, obviously, it's not like that because they wanted to do with it the sigil thing. They didn't want it to be like that convoluted, like, you know, a sigil going through all of the books and make it complicated.
Yeah, because the original CrossGen setup, all the books were in multiple genres and basically were not connected to each other, except for the fact that all of the characters would have this kind of glowing tattoo, the sigil, and there was some mythology behind that. So ultimately they were connected, but the characters were all in different worlds, didn't really realize they were connected at all, except for this one element that showed up in each book. But they've completely done away with that connective element in the new Marvel CrossGen books.
Exactly. And pretty much the main girl becomes like this apprentice to the magic guild in here by just using her wits, pretty much. She's really good at math, and she's able to solve a problem like in a room full of these would-be apprentices who weren't able to answer it. And she kind of upsets things because she's kind of a maid at the palace where they are, and obviously it's the noble arts, like we said before. We were talking about that, and she is lower class, so people aren't very happy about that. Also, just like in the first book, the sister character is more of like a studious character who's really into the magic. Right. And the main character is not so much. She's, you know, kind of...
Was that in the original?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That seems kind of central.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So, you know, there's definitely going to be a rift between the two girls because of this. But yeah, I kind of like the conflict of the book. But like I said, it's not really adding too much, I feel like, to like genre, to like the fantasy genre, I feel like. It's pretty basic. But it's a pretty close remake to the first one, but they made, you know, good enough like incision changes, I think.
Cool. Yeah, I think I basically feel the same way as you did. I was not a huge CrossGen fan in the way that Dave was. He really loved CrossGen. You guys have no idea. And I was not as into their books. My impression with CrossGen, which, you know, was its own company at one time, its own publisher run by a guy called Mark Alessi, was that they did genre work of generally high quality, I thought. You know, they nice looking books, you know, solidly written. I thought that the way they advertised their books and kind of got the word out about the company was really aggressive and sometimes inventive. But the books themselves, other than being competently done, didn't really offer anything particularly unique or interesting.
I think there were high quality books in each of their genres.
Yeah, I agree.
And they also...
They were all just good, though. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like it wasn't like... You know what I mean? Like, oh my god, this is amazing. There were no, like...
They had some stand-up books, I feel like.
Well, I read some of them at the time they were coming out, probably the ones you recommended me. I'm sure I read at least an issue or two of Mystic. I don't remember that being one that I read a lot of. I did like some of the CrossGen stuff, but yeah, to me they were just kind of okay. So I was a little surprised that Marvel actually decided to revive the CrossGen imprint, and that they felt there was an audience for that. But obviously there is. So, you know, good on them. But I kind of feel this is the only one of the new Marvel books that I've read. With this one, basically kind of how I felt about CrossGen the first time around is that, okay, it's, you know, a competently executed book, but it's just, there's no real exciting idea there. There's nothing really unique. That would probably be my criticism of at least Mystic #1. I mean, just looking at this one first issue, it's, you know, pretty well written by Willow Wilson. It has nice artwork. I think the art is probably the biggest change is just cosmetic. Like, the book looks a lot different than, was it Brandon Peterson,
yep.
Who did the art in the first one. So they're very different art styles stylistically. What's the name of David Lopez is the author of this one. Kind of a more indie kind of look to this one, whereas Brandon Peterson is a very, you know, polished mainstream style artist, almost in an Image Comics mode. So the books look completely different. But as you said, the story is probably pretty similar.
Mm-hmm. I will say the art, I really did enjoy the art in this one.
Yeah. I mean, I did enjoy the art.
The coloring, I think, was really pretty by, was it Nathan Fairbairn? It kind of looks like a Saturday morning cartoon almost.
Yes.
You know, that kind of quality?
Yes.
It's very sleek and
well, that's
cinematic.
Yeah.
It's very pretty.
I mean, that's the thing with this book. It definitely is reaching beyond or at least maybe even around the typical, Wednesday comic book crowd. I can see this book, possibly even a digest size kind of trade paperback, shelved in the young adult or children's sections of bookstores once it's collected. I think they're very obviously aiming for that market. If you look at the back of the book, there's kind of a paragraph description of what the book's about. You don't really see that in comic books, but obviously you see it in books and storybooks. They made the kids orphans, which is very much a stock element in young readers' titles. So I feel like this is very deliberately aimed at young, probably tween girls.
And also,
primarily.
Since you said that, actually, Sigil, the one that they remade, they took her from this, aged, military men in space and made it a teenage girl in high school.
Yeah.
So it seems like
that's what they're going for.
Yeah, it seems like they really are going for that.
Which
kind
is
of audience.
fine intentions. And, good on Marvel to have a female writer on this, too, which is something that's a bit of a problem at the mainstream comic book companies. Possibly a topic for a later show. But the problem there is that, I read a lot of young adult and teen books for my job, and you read a lot of those, too. And, stacked up against those, at least based on this first issue, Mystic really doesn't have much to offer. It is very standard story. It all felt a bit soft, a bit undercooked. I didn't get a real sense of place. It takes place in this other world, which kind of mixes archaic fantasy, kind of medieval style, with some steampunk elements. There's an orphanage. There's a mean woman who runs the orphanage. Again, all very generic. Nothing really popped. There was no twist. The story itself, of course, the girl who's not as into magic is the one that picked, and the one who's more into magic is not picked, and she feels left out. The orphan, just everything about the book was just very middle of the way, very bland, very vanilla, and honestly, comics should be cool. Comics should be the things that kids want to read, and their parents are trying to get them to read real books. But, if you are at all up on what's being published right now, especially in the fantasy genre for kids, it's a lot more exciting and fun, and I think appealing to the young tween girls than Mystic is, that Marvel's going after. So, at least based on this first issue, I don't see a real strong selling point here for Mystic. Granted, I'm not the target audience for it. Personally, I thought it was an okay comic book. That's probably how I would rate it. But even as a comic book for a young girl or boy, I don't know that they're really going to gravitate towards it.
To be fair, though, it's the first issue in a 4-issue series.
Yep.
If they're obviously gearing it toward girls, teenage girls, who don't really go to comic book
No.
stores.
This is going to be a trade paperback. Yes.
So, you kind of have to sell it on the entire book. And this is the first issue.
Yeah. Well, that's always
They're pretty much retelling the first issue.
Well, we're basically going to say this every episode that we review.
That we do first issues.
That we review comic books because, it's you can't judge it, but we are judging it nevertheless. So I only have this first issue to go on, so I have to give it kind of a thumbs down on Mystic. I didn't really... I wasn't really sold on it for myself personally, and I wonder after the audience that Marvel's going for. I don't know that they're going to be there for the extent that they think they are. You got to bring, even for 10, 12, 11, 13-year-old kids, you gotta bring a little bit. If they're into reading, they've seen some pretty cool stuff with Rick Riordan and Harry Potter and all that, and I don't know that this book offers literally a single thing that they're not going to find elsewhere. So that was my main problem with it. So, we'll see. You'll probably keep reading it.
I will definitely keep reading
it.
Cool.
So you let me know if it improves.
I will do that.
If Mystic sounds appealing to you, I wouldn't talk you out of reading it. But it's certainly not good enough to appeal to people who aren't naturally inclined to that sort of thing. And even if you are inclined, I don't know.